Hi, this is Aidy here for CG Masters, and today I'd like to take a look at how to do proper UV unfolding in Blender, as well as UV unstretching, stitching, and UV self-correction. And this is something that I want to take a look at for two reasons mainly. One is because this seems to be a little bit of a mysterious topic that I don't see necessarily covered that often in other tutorials. The other thing is because it's something that is coming up quite a bit as I go through this game environment creation. So I'm just going to press Z to toggle it into wireframe, and then I'm going to come over to because I have simplified just near the rest of the asset pack from the recent DVD. I've got these objects here, which is just very, very simple and isolated. In fact, to properly isolate it, I should probably press B to border select and then Shift H to hide everything else. And then now if I press Alt Z, we can see I've essentially just decluttered what we were looking at before. So we're just looking at the essential elements now. So I have a version of the window with the brick wall texture behind. I have a version of it complete, which is this one here with it taken out. I'm actually going to show that, rather than just switching viewing modes, I'm just going to show this area here. This is kind of what I'm trying to refer to, is you can see that this texture tiles seamlessly around this corner here, even though before, in fact, actually, if I just duplicate that one more time, just for the sake of it, just grab these four faces, extrude that back. You can see, obviously, there's a little bit of work to do there. That isn't going to automatically tile seamlessly around that corner. And so we'll be just taking a look at how we're going to go about doing that. Or at least we're going to take a look at doing that among some other things. So first things first, whenever we're about to do some mesh level editing or anything below the object level basically, or in other words the edit mode, whatever is happening to the scaling at the object level will sort of be translated into the edit mode. So we need to make sure that basically we're going to get funky results if we've not got a scale of 1:1:1 here. That is the case here, so we shouldn't have any problems. But just to demonstrate what sort of problem you'd get, if I press S and X to widen this out a little bit and then tab into edit mode, you can see currently the UVs are kind of representing what that shape was before, so the square. Anyway, we can go and press U and then unwrap, and you'll see that we get a warning up here saying object has non-uniform scale. So in a way we kind of don't get what we expected, which was maybe a rectangular version of UV layout here. So to kind of illustrate what I'm trying to say here, I'm just going to tab back into object mode, press Control A to apply the scale. So if we're watching what happens to the Z value over here, I can press Control A and then apply the scale. You can see the Z value goes to 1. Now if I tab back into edit mode and then press U and then try to unwrap again, we now get something which we might have been expecting previously. So that's hopefully that's not been too confusing. I'm just going to now delete that with the X key. And the next thing I'd like to take a look at is the textured solid mode, as this will become important as well. Right now we're in our textured mode, especially because we're using our GLSL shading here. It's useful for us because we can see our normal maps and specular maps in the viewport here in real time. However, the lighting is being taken into effect, and so for example if we wanted to be working on our UVs here to see what the texture is going to do, we would have to start moving lights around to be able to do that. But there is an easy way to be able to kind of get around that, which is by pressing Z to toggle into our wireframe and then Z again to toggle between wireframe and solid shading mode. And when we're in that mode, we can see we get this textured solid option in the properties sidebar here. So if I actually take that off, that's normally what you would get. If I turn that on, we get access to be able to see the textures. Now the textures for this aren't dependent on lights, so that means we would actually see our texture from any angle basically. We're never going to be in a position where we're going to have some dark areas kind of occluding the view. But you may be saying, what is all this darkness on this? So if I just press Shift D to duplicate that, you can actually see that there's a whole load of darkness on these things anyway. So before you call me a liar, just hear me out a second. If we take a look at textured mode again with Alt Z, you can see, you might be able to see where that darkening is, and the lighter areas is a kind of a different kind of texture is happening. Now basically a grunge map is being blended into the texture there, just to create a bit of variation and reduce the amount of tiling that we might see on this texture. And if you want me to go over that, by the way, just give me a shout and I'll try and cover that at another time to show how to set that up. but in any case, this is basically just being driven by vertex colors. And if I just press V to enter vertex painting mode there and press T to bring up our tool shelf, you can see I've got black at the moment, and now I can just start to paint. And we can see we're changing the color of the way the grunge map is being applied there, and then I can press white to paint it back in. And then you can kind of see if I press V again to come out of that mode and then press Z to get into textured solid, you can see kind of the new darkness is showing up there in the places that it was now painted. So to help with this, if you want to kind of maintain what you've already painted, I can press Shift Space, come over to the Object Data tab of the Properties window, come down to Vertex Colors, and just press plus to copy the vertex colors that we've already got. And then I'm just going to press V to come back to the vertex colors here, and it's set to white. And now I'm just going to go to paint and then set the vertex colors. That should basically just remove all the black from the vertex colors, but it's only going to be this one. So if we select this one, you'll see them. If we select this one, we won't. So what we can do is we can basically just delete this as we only need it for viewing purposes in the textured solid mode while we might be doing UVing or something like that, so we can get a cleaner view. Or at least that's the best way I've found to kind of resolve that temporarily. The other thing that I should obviously cover here to do with textured solid mode is to how to get this texture to show up, and that's very, very simple. All we need to do is just make sure we can see our UV image editor there. I'm just going to give this a little bit more space and close out those side panels. And if I type into edit mode and then select these middle faces, for example, all I need to do is just to come into choose our other texture. So let's just choose this here, and you can see that now that this texture is now associated with these UVs. And so if I select these faces, you can see the other texture shows up. As soon as I select this face, we can see we now get that texture. So this one is called Brick Wall 2048. So I'm just going to select these four faces again and then find that 2048, this one here, Brick Wall 2048, and then just click that, and then there you go, we're back to where we needed to be. So let's get on with the business of unwrapping in Blender and some of the cool tools that are available to us here. So the first thing, I'm going to tap into edit mode and I'm going to take a look at the edge slide and the auto self-correcting UVs that we've got in there. So I'm just going to Alt right click while in edge mode this central edge loop here, and then what we can do is we can kind of press G, and then I'm going to press X to constrain along the X-axis, and you can see we can move back and forth there, but you can see we're basically squishing the UVs back and two there, but that's not what we want. So I'm going to undo that with Control Z, and then instead press G and then G again to enter our edge slide, and now we kind of get in a much more preferred behavior when it comes to preserving UVs. So I'm just going to squish this right against that other edge there, this other edge loop there, and then I'm just going to press T to bring up the properties sidebar, and then you can see here we've got this option to correct UVs within the edge slide tool, and as you can see it's not actually enabled right now, but it just seems to work by default. But once we enable it and then disable it, you can kind of see what would have happened before. So you get this very, very stretched UV and then this very, very squished set of UVs down here. And you can also, of course, press F6 to bring up that this information at the location of the cursor, and so we can correct the UVs there. And once we have them corrected, we can then press G twice to slide these edges. The UVs are corrected without squashing anything. But if we alt right click this boundary edge and then press G and then G again, you can see, although we can kind of come in, and that's all very well and good, we can't actually stretch this out. So if we wanted to move these by pressing G and then X and then just stretch these out, you can see there isn't any option which shows up to help us to correct those UVs, but there is something that we can do. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable the keep UV. Let's find this button over here, the keep UV and edit mode mesh selection in sync. If I enable that, you can see that we get access to all our UVs now, even though the mesh wasn't entirely selected, which is what was dependent on the UV showing up with this disabled. But now we can see that our selection in here is mirrored or synchronized in the 3D view as well. And what we want to do is press Control Tab to bring up our mesh select mode at the location of the cursor there and grab the vertices. And then I'm just going to press A to deselect everything, and then border select with the B key across those. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press P to pin those UVs into place so that they're not going to move when we try and do anything. Because if I just step back by pressing Ctrl Z, select everything and then press U to unwrap, you can see the UVs come down here, and while they are correctly in proportion now, these UVs that were over here were not preserved. And so as you'll see when I go Ctrl Z, this might be what we've painstakingly prepared before, and we don't want to ruin all this. We want to just essentially pin these into position and unfold just these. And so again, if I just press B, grab these, within the UV image editor, press P to pin those, and then I'm just going to grab everything with the A key, and then I can either press U in here and unwrap, or we can just press E quickly in here, and that does exactly the same thing. That's just going to unwrap it, and now we can see these were preserved, and now this looks right. This looks like it's preserved it into position. Then the only other thing that we need to do is to press Alt P to essentially unpin everything, and then we're back to where we were. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so now let's take a look at unstretching. I'm just going to grab these vertices here and then maybe move them around here perhaps. I'm just going to press Shift Y not to move it on that axis, and then maybe move that to about there, and we can see that our texture isn't looking that great anymore. And what we can do is we can come to our UV menu, and then you have this option here, minimize stretch, with Control V. Now with this problem area selected, nothing's going to happen if we just press Control V. What we do need to do is maybe press Control and then plus on the numpad to expand our selection there, and then press Control V. And then we're still not really getting anything, so I'm just going to do that one more time and then press Control V, and now we're basically starting to get something. So what I tend to do in this circumstance is just border select around the necessary stretched area there, and let's just actually take another look here. Press N and T to bring up our sidebars and come down here for our UVs and show stretching, and you can see where the problem area is here. As it gets closer from blue is perfectly fine. As we get closer to red, we're getting more of a problem there. So what we can do is we can press Control V now, and you can see it almost manages to fix it. It's not quite perfect, but it almost manages to fix it. And then what we can do is we can scroll the mouse wheel to essentially blend in the previous position of the UVs, should we not want to completely unstretch it as much as we have. As I say though, it isn't perfect, but it can be a very useful tool, so that's worth pointing out. What I'll do just to resolve this for now is just to undo a few of those steps. So let's take a look at the synchronization of the mesh selection and the UVs. I'm just going to press Shift Space to minimize the view there, and let's close out those sidebars, and then tab into edit mode. And in fact, actually, let's just turn off our stretch there. And so basically, as we can see here, if I go to select this vertex, this UV is synchronized in its selection. If I'm thinking, where are my UVs for that face? I know perfectly well where they are now because that comes up. If we turn this mode off, you can see the way that this works now is that only the UVs of what we have selected show up. And that's great for isolating, in fact. But there is another way in which we can isolate, which is just simply to press Shift H to hide everything else. And although you can see nothing is showing, nothing changes within here, if we had the selection synchronized and press Shift H in here, we kind of get a very similar behavior as we had when the mesh selection wasn't in sync. So that's kind of a useful workaround there. There are another couple of things that is different about these two modes, and that is these options here. You have vertices, or at least UVs in a way. We've got these edges, faces, and islands when things aren't synchronized. So that means an island is essentially a UV shell. Any connected parts of UVs are sort of selected there. If I just press highlight this face as well and just move this around, you can see everything's all nicely connected. If I synchronize that, this doesn't work in the same way. We can select this, and then in fact we can just move it away and the other edges aren't attached, and so we kind of have this free floating thing here. That also means that we can't just select islands, and you'll see that that option is no longer there. So the vertices, the edges, and the faces is where it stops. Also, if we press Control L to try and select our linked, so for example in here we can go Control L to select linked, and the whole shell gets selected. However, with the UVs and press Control L, that's not going to happen. It can't work like that. If, for example, you have a seam, perhaps we had a seam down here, so Control E marks seam, and then these faces were essentially unwrapped and over there, and that's kind of what we wanted. And we want to be able to select this shell, and we want to press Control L to quickly select it. That's not going to work. What we could do is press Control L in the 3D view, and you'll notice it's limited by seams. So we can uncheck that if we want to select everything or just that one UV shell. So hopefully that kind of clears up a little bit of that. I'm just going to undo a few of those moves that we did though, just to before we mark that seam, I think. And there is one other thing I'd like to point out about this mode, and that is when we uncheck this option, you can see we also get this drop down menu here, which is the sticky selection mode. And this means if I highlight everything to show all our UVs and I get this vertex here, you can see when I move it around, all I'm doing is clicking it. I'm not sort of dragging across it with the border selector or anything. I'm just clicking that and then moving that around. We've got options here now to be able to sort of disable this, and then we kind of get access to what we had before, where none of the UVs are kind of like welded together really, and we have an easy access of being able to separate everything off. So which obviously is quite powerful in certain circumstances depending on what you're trying to achieve with the UVs there. So with all that out of the way, we're now finally equipped to be able to tackle the problem that we had before with the recessed window frames. So I'm just going to reset the view back to what it usually is. So back to shared location there, and then I'm also going to keep things in sync and tab into edit mode there. In fact, we can delete that and come over to here with shift space, and let's take a look. So this is the initial setup. This is where we're aiming for, and this is a duplicate of the first window, which we can basically just use to create this kind of effect. So let's hide, in fact I'm not going to hide that, I'm going to yeah, I'm just going to move that off to the side. That's not really that important at the moment. Also, let's correct the vertices there. I'm just going to give this an extra set of vertex colors. Press V, and then with the just paint white on there, and then undo. I've missed a bit in the corner there, and then press V again to just come back. I think I've missed a little bit on there as well. In fact, just to be on the safe side, let's just set the vertex colors. Now go shift space, maximize that. I'm just going to put that back there, and then tab into edit mode, and then really what I want is that edge loop there. So I'm alt right clicking on that edge loop. I'm going to press 1 to just align the view into front orthographic there, press Z to toggle the wireframe, and then I'm just going to press G and then G again with the confidence to know that my UVs aren't getting stretched, and I can align these edges up, and then that side's done, and then now this side is done. So double tap G to do that. So let's just toggle the textured solid mode there, and we can see that everything is showing up fine. And let's just press G twice to just bring that down to, I think, about there, and then alt right click this edge loop and double tap G just to bring that up to, I think, about there. Let's just see. Yes, I think that's right. Okay, and so now what we can do is we can grab those 4 faces and then extrude them backwards, and then move this backwards as well. So I'm just going to press Y to get the Y axis there. Also, we need to be in textured solid mode to be able to see what we're doing a bit better there. And so that is fine for the most part. However, as you can see, these are going to be a problem. Around this stretching around the side here is going to be a problem. So let's just resolve this. I don't actually need those bottom faces or those top faces, so I'm just going to highlight them and then press X to delete them. And that means, as you can see, as you may be able to tell, the reason I don't need them is because of these areas here. So I'm just going to press Control L, and that is limited by seams. So I want to uncheck that, and then bring that to the foreground there by pressing G and then Y to constrain it along the Y axis. I'll do the same with the bottom there. Control L to select all the linked faces there, and then that is fine. That is not limited by any seams. So I'm just going to press G and then middle mouse gesture along the Y axis to constrain it, or just press the Y key. And then I'm going to Control Tab, get this edge loop by Alt right clicking on it, and then press Z again to toggle the textured solid mode, and then G and then Y to stretch it out. Now this is the perfect case for what we've just done before. I've just stretched that back. It's not hugely noticeable really, but let's just resolve this. So I'm just going to highlight those three faces, the culprits really. I'm going to press Shift Space. Let's take a look at our UVs. Now this is a little bit muddy, so I'm just going to press Shift H to hide everything but those. And that's fine. This face and this face textures are fine. Let's take a look in vertex mode. I'm just going to highlight across those, make sure that we've got them all, and then press P to pin them, and then I'm going to highlight them all with the A key and then just press E, and then you can see there's a little bit of scaling on that, so I'm going to correct that by going Control A and then apply the scale, tab back into edit mode, and then do that again with the E key. And that actually seems fine. In fact, let's take a look at correct aspect or not. So if I uncheck that, that actually now shows up properly. This is how it should be. So as you can see, the shape is a little bit more faithful to how it is in the 3D view. So we didn't want to correct the aspect there. That is fine. So then I can just press Alt P to clear the pinning. So that is done. And as you'll notice, when we tab back into object mode, all the rest of the mesh comes back. So I'm just going to press Alt H just to unhide everything anyway. And I'm going to ignore this area here. I'm not really too concerned about that because I don't want to waste too much of your time. This is quite simple stuff really. And then I'm going to select the wall, tab into edit mode, select these faces that are the culprits here, press Shift H to hide everything except those that we want to work on. And let's take a look in the UV image editor. You can see these are the faces we've got there, and you can sort of see by these black dots here that these faces are kind of all squished up. If we press E to unwrap them, that's not necessarily getting what we wanted. What we want to do is to in vertex mode, I'm going to highlight these guys and then pin them into position. But you'll notice there's a little bit of a problem now because these vertices are pinned as well. So if I highlight everything and then press E, we're not really going to get what we need. So this is where I'm going to use a different mesh selection. So I'm going to just Alt P to unpin everything and then change the kind of mesh selection that we've got there. And that allows us to just isolate those two faces there and then press P to pin those UVs. And then I'm going to grab this edge and then press V. And then you can see that this is now going to stitch. So I'm pressing V to stitch that UV island onto where we were here. And then I'm just going to press Enter because that's correct. If that wasn't correct, by the way, if you've got a more complicated example, you can see down here we've got the tab. We've got the snapping on, we've got midpoints off, limit, and if I just give it a little bit more space here, and then do that again with the V key, you can see we've got the I to switch the island, and that's the key bit there really. It's I, which is, as you can see, switching between which island is going to stitch to which. So it's the way that it's done it in the first place is what I want, so I'm just going to press Enter. And while that is pretty good, we're getting there. These are now stitched into position. Obviously, this area here isn't quite right, and we could sort of scale that down manually maybe and see if we could try and line that up. And that's perfectly fine. There's no problem with that. There's other things you could do to manually do that as well. But we have access to grab these two faces, and then we can press E, and then now we've basically unfolded them. So we've stitched and then unfolded, and that's that area done. And then let's just quickly repeat that for the other side. I'm just going to press Alt H to unhide everything. I'm going to grab these four, so we've not got any cluttered view there. I'm going to pin these into position. Press P, highlight everything, press E, and then that is fine. That is completely fine. Or if we had any other instance where if I was, for example, using these mesh selection, and then again press Shift H to hide everything, and then we had these two faces somewhere else and we wanted to stitch them together, we could grab these two, press V to stitch, return, that's fine. And then let's say these were all over the place, we could then grab those and press E to unfold them with the others pinned. And then I'm just going to highlight everything and then Alt P to unpin them. You'll notice we can't see the pinning unless we're in our vertex mode within this particular mesh selection mode. So hopefully that isn't too confusing, and that gives you some useful tools for experiencing the mysterious nature of the way that Blender does its UV unwrapping, because it can be a little bit different than some of the other paradigms that are featured within other 3D applications. So with that, thanks for watching.